Hello and welcome to our new moon in Sagittarius forecast. I've popped the chart up already so we can look at it. Let me just quickly blow it up for a second. Okay, so the new moon is happening at 1 degree of Sagittarius over here. And I know I say this in every video, but just a reminder that new moon is when the sun and moon are together. And new moon is a dark moon. So a way to remember this is when the moon is right there with the sun, his light is kind of eclipsing her. Because in fact, the moon doesn't actually carry any light of her own. She reflects his light. So when she is opposite him in the sky at full moon, she is able to reflect the fullness of his light on the full surface of her body, well, the side we can see. When she is 90 degrees from the sun, that is when we have one of the quarter moon phases, which looks like a half moon in the sky. So just a good kind of understanding is when the new moon is happening, the sun and moon are together, they're in this sort of dark, quiet time. So of course, wherever you are, if it's the daytime, the sun is very obvious and bright, unless you have cloud cover, but you know what I mean. The daytime is clear. But in the night, when the moon is dark with the sun, it's almost like the sun and moon go into this cave, into their bedroom, you might say, where their most intimate conversations can take place. And they are most intimate with one another at that point. It's like a lover's kind of energy. So they're having this new moon this month at 1 degree of Sagittarius, so very early in the Sagittarius journey. And during this time, just leading up to that new moon, when all of these planets, because for this new moon, we obviously have the sun and moon at 1 degree, but we also have Venus at 9 degrees and Mercury at 10 degrees of Sagittarius. So all of the personal planets, and personal planets are basically the ones that impact more our personality traits. The further out planets are more big experiential things and the bigger life events and that type of thing, for the most part, whereas the inner planets are more personalized, and that includes Mars. So we've got Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars are personal planets, and all of the personal planets are sitting in Sagittarius, barring Mars, who's opposite that in Gemini, opposite by sign, not degree, for those of you who know your astrology. So Mars is retrograding in Gemini on the opposite side of the chart from all the other friends in the playground. And you might think of that a little bit if you were born on this day, for example, or a child born on this day would have this one section of their lives would be all the friends getting together and always leaving that one guy out. And that would be Mars, that's always getting kind of left out of the party. Oppositional energy with Mars on the other side, and Mars being the planet that can be known as a malevolent energy. He's a challenging guy. So he's going to become possibly the bully in the playground, and that's why he gets left out, but he's also the bully because he gets left out. And you can see that dichotomy that happens in that situation where we start thinking, well, can we blame Mars for becoming a bully? He'd rather have negative attention than no attention. And then do we blame then the other planets for leaving him out? What came first, the chicken or the egg? And it does become a difficult thing to deal with. So if that was your birth chart, for example, that internal dialogue and conversation is a permanent part of who you are, and you always need to manage that within yourself. And that's what our natal chart or birth chart is actually about, looking at where are those blueprint conversations that are supportive of one another, like all these Sagittarian planets. If that was your natal chart, they support one another, they back one another, they encourage one another, which can mean that all the positive Sagittarian traits are uber enthusiastic and infused and supported, but also the shadow traits of that same sign can be excessive. So it always comes back to doing your own work and figuring out, how do I get to know myself well enough that I can mitigate my shadow stuff and accept my shadow stuff and enter into dialogue with my shadow stuff rather than judge it, because it's going to be there. So this birth chart would be a clear indication, for example, of an excessive Sagittarian energy in the pro and the con. And it may have this intense energy in the opposite sign of Gemini as well, but with different kind of reasoning. It's not so backed up. Mars is all by himself and retrograde still, remember, in Gemini. So he's frustrated. He can't really decide which way to go. Should I be the bully or should I be the nice kid and try and get them to like me, and then they'll invite me to their bench or to their party? You know, he's can't decide how to act. And also, he's just not as forward moving as he normally is, which is like, just make a decision and go for it. He can't do that because he's in retrograde. So he's getting stuck in his head and he's dithering. And then perhaps somebody approaches him and he's frustrated and he lashes out, and hence the bullying. But then maybe he has the guilt and the mental narrative. Why did I do that? So I know I'm speaking into this as if it was a birth chart, but what happens is, if this is the chart of the new moon, this becomes the narrative that you are going to experience during that new moon. So it's important for us to understand that your blueprint, which is your natal chart, is going to always be your conversation. And then as the astrology progresses in the heavens right now, that's your current kind of conversation. But if you overlay that on your own blueprint, if you are somebody who is a Sagittarian or who has several planets in Sagittarius or Gemini, this is going to be a stronger kind of energy for you, because it's going to trigger what you already have in your natal blueprint. If you've got nothing there, you might suddenly be dealing with some kind of conversation, like we've just discussed, that you're not used to. And so because you're not used to it, it might feel extra uncomfortable, or because it's not triggering anything in your chart, you may not really notice it as much. And the only way you can tell these things is just by living them. But if we use tools like journaling and whatnot, then we are able to kind of reflect and embody, bring it into some kind of a concrete form, what's going on in our lives. So I definitely wanted to mention that. I'm just going to shrink the chart again, because the conversation at the axis of any two signs, like we've just come out of that eclipse season where we were going Taurus, Scorpio, Taurus, Scorpio, Taurus, Scorpio, and the whole conversation is this continual give and take between these two signs. That is an axis, signs opposite one another. So here we've shifted now as and the shift really in terms of the moon phase really happens when the sun and moon have their new moon. So this means that we've now shifted into the Sagittarian cycle, which means we're Sag, Gemini, Sag, Gemini. That is now the axis of conversation. So this is the new moon in Sag, and in 2 weeks, we're going to have full moon in Gemini. So you can see that now we spend the next lunation or lunar cycle or month, which we could say month, conversing between the primary sort of theming is Sag first, but ultimately it's Sag, Gemini, and the back and forth dialogue and narrative, which in this particular month is going to be pretty intense, because we start with the 4 planets in Sag, and Mars is doing a very intensive retrograde process in Gemini. So I just want to remind you that this chart is for my part of the world. So the houses, where you see the houses set up, if you understand houses, that's different, will be different in your part of the world. You'll have to draw up a chart for yourself. And I'm using AstroSeek, which is super easy for anybody to do that if they want to, and to put in their own time. Maybe I'll just quickly show you. If you go up to the moon phase calendar, and then it'll give you a section just below where you can put in your own time zone, and then you just go and click on the new moon link. Play around with it. And if you are interested in moon phases, I do have an Udemy course called Moon Phases Made Simple, and the link will be below this video. And this is a place where you can just learn to understand the moon phases a little bit better, and also how to work. I have a video in there on how to work with AstroSeek, which is a site, so that you can find these things more easily if you enjoy following every phase. And ideally, as I say, you want to take that to your own chart. Because just before all of these planets began moving into Sagittarius, they were obviously at the end of Scorpio. And when they were coming through the last degrees of Scorpio, they were activating Neptune and Jupiter. who are very, very strong in their own sign of Pisces. So they activated those in a trine, which is a 120-degree angle. It's a beautiful, like graceful, you can think of it as like a dancer's kind of angle. It's comfortable, it's supportive, it's water to water, Scorpio to Pisces. It's like attracts like in this situation. I get you. You operate in a watery way. Yes, I get you too. Let's party. Let's hang out. Let's dance. In fact, in water. Let's feel our feelings. So first we had, actually, even though it doesn't look like it here, Venus moved in first, and the next day Mercury, but he moves faster than her. So they came past and they created this beautiful 120-degree angle leading up to this new moon. And then the sun and moon did the same thing before they moved into Sagittarius. So first of all, knowing that the lead up into this new moon phase had this beautiful activation of a trine to to Neptune and Jupiter. And that would have been Mercury and Venus and sun and moon all activated, that beautiful dance, that beautiful conversation with Neptune and then Jupiter. And then they all moved into Sagittarius. So they came in this kind of graceful way, feeling really expanded, Jupiter, and idealistic, Neptune, and ready to leap into Sagittarius, which is an energy all about seeking the truth, going on adventures and travels, whether those are armchair astronauts or actually traveling, it doesn't matter. It's about the energy behind it. Perhaps you travel to different cultures by watching many interesting documentary on other cultures, and that really expands your understanding, your belief system, your philosophies, because Sag is the philosopher. And also Sag is very much about, there is a dual nature in Sag, because Sagittarius is the centaur energy, so it's half man, half horse, or half woman, half horse. So there is the human half, which is more sort of intellectual, and then there is the animal half, which is more instinctual. And it gives us this beautiful opportunity to integrate our intellectual and instinctual, and really linking, always bridging it at the heart center, bridging the head and the body, in a sense, the head and the a lizard brain, even, you might say, the more survival instincts of the body and the gut knowing at the level of the heart. So that's really important to do. And then just to remember then that even though we had that beautiful 120-degree angle to those two outer planets, as these other planets, Mercury, then Venus, then Sun, then, well, actually the moon travels fastest. So she's going to actually move on out quite quickly. So her first, then Mercury, Venus, Sun. As they continue through Sagittarius, when they get to the end of Sagittarius, they are now no longer 120 degrees from these planets. They're now 90 degrees from these planets. And 90 degrees is the square. So the 120, you can almost see like a graceful line of a dancer with an arm extended. And the 90 degrees is more of a squash, a pressure to change. So now suddenly they've started this new moon cycle with this bringing in this beautiful grace and potential and promise and desire. And then they get to the end of the Sagittarius season, and suddenly there is, okay, but hang on, something's got to give. Something isn't working with those same two planets. So let's say wherever I was excessively expansive, again, we'll say Jupiter, and I'm just giving one keyword here, or where am I excessively idealistic, a dreamer, we think Neptune, and how is that not actually working for me anyway? Like, how is that not being brought into reality? It's one thing to dream. It's one thing to imagine. It's another thing to actually create. So that's what's going to come up for us later in the month as those planets move on. We do have a little bit of a reprieve, sort of, from the whole Uranus, because the nodes are still there with Uranus and Taurus. So the Scorpio-Taurus conversation here is still happening, but it's a little bit less activated and triggered unless you have planets there in your chart. So again, I'm going to give you a little example. I have my sun. If you saw my chart on top of this chart, my sun is at 26 degrees of Gemini. So you may remember that Mars went retrograde and stayed for ages at 25 degrees. That's right next to my sun. So that would have triggered me. The way for me to experience how did that trigger me is to be cognizant, to take notes, to journal, to be present, to do my meditation, whatever your tools are that you use in order to do some self-evaluation. That's how you check. So I know that my sun has been quite triggered by Mars stationing retrograde. And now this square that I spoke to the fact that the end of Sagittarius is going to be squared or 90 degrees to Pisces, but it's also to all of the mutable signs. So if you have something in any of the mutable signs, especially late degrees, that's going to be quite triggering. So late degrees are the mutable signs, and mutable would be Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. So this whole conversation here, because on this actual day of the new moon, Jupiter is stationing to go direct. So he's just dipped his toe back into Pisces to create a bit more of a, remember I was here and remember this is what happened. And now he's going to be moving forward again and ultimately quite quickly moving back into Aries. So that again, if I have my sun at 26 degrees, Jupiter is just near enough that he's going to, again, activate that for me. So what is that going to mean for me? So you look at where your planets are on this. This requires you to have a birth chart and for you to start paying attention to degree points. So I'm just giving, for those of you who are interested in that, a little bit of insight as to how to do that. If you want to have your chart done first so that you have a better kind of grounding of what that all means for you, and so that you can sort of look at your chart and start to understand it, then do get in touch. Link is below this video. And you can have a reading, and then based on that and having your chart, you can check in with these things on a regular basis, and you'll have a better understanding of what in your life, what in your blueprint is being triggered. But ultimately for the mutable signs, and that is obviously if you have your sun in a mutable sign, and most of us know our sun sign, that's like the star sign. So I'm a Gemini, that's mutable because it's a Gemini, and that's mutable. If you have your sun sign, your moon sign, your rising sign, or really any planets in a place, you can see what's being triggered for you. And because the new moon is at 1 degree, that's the beginning of the sign. And because it's going to start triggering in with all of this and even Mars later in the sign, it doesn't really matter where you have planets this month within the mutable signs. If you have anything in Gemini, Virgo, Sag, or Pisces, this is going to be a month where some of your things are going to be triggered. And I say triggered more because when we're looking at a 120-degree angle, which we spoke to earlier as like that graceful dancer, that triggers, but it triggers in a positive way. It triggers you kind of creatively. Whereas when I say triggered, I'm talking squares, oppositions, conjunctions. Those triggers are uncomfortable triggers. Ultimately, they are good because they give us the momentum that we need. It's like spring cleaning. If we never do it, then can you imagine what our lives would look like? So it's necessary, but it's usually uncomfortable. And a big theme we've been having this whole year plus is getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. What I'm offering you as you develop into understanding your own astrology a little bit is to go, okay, so this is going to be a pressure point. This is going to be a bit uncomfortably triggering. So instead of contracting myself when that happens, freaking out, feeling the overwhelm, breaking down, let me know that it's coming. Let me soften, surrender, breathe, and recognize that it's breakdown to break through. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm just breaking off the old pieces that I don't need. So that is what I'm hoping that you will start to be able to observe in your own chart and in your own lives, rather than freaking out when you see that something triggering is coming. Just look at it as an opportunity to polish up the rough diamond, because that's really where we want to get to. Not looking in panic and fear, but looking at, how is this serving me? How is this making me a better version of myself? So I think that's all I want to talk into in this chart. It's already quite a lot. We haven't spoken into every single planet, but I don't think that that's necessary. I hope this has been helpful. as I say, I do have a moon phases course, which will be super, super helpful to just let you understand how things are progressing for you, and also let you know a little bit more about, well, what is my moon sign and what is my natal moon phase, because that's also a powerful place in which to work. And yes, if you are a woman, because the Red Tent practice is a woman's lunar gathering, that's also something you might want to get in touch about, is how to get involved in that. I do a global one, I do a local one, and it is very much about women gathering at new moon, which is that seeding time where we plant our intentions and we decide, where do I want to focus with the energy that is already here. I'm not going against the tide. I'm focusing with where I am and what I've got, and I'm going to use that and enhance. So if you can catch the wind in your sails, that's awesome. And if the wind's blowing in the direction that doesn't take you in the direction you thought you should go, you go, all right, well, this is where the wind's blowing, so let me go on a voyage, let me go on an adventure, which is so Sagittarian anyway. So I hope this has been helpful, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video. Thanks very much for watching. Please remember to like, share, subscribe, help me to grow, and comments are wonderful, and I'd love to reply to any questions.